The first thing Nadia felt was the cold. Not the rain, not the pain in her ribs. The cold, that particular kind of cold that lives in an alley at midnight when you realize no one is coming to save you. Deacon's hand was already around her throat. "You think that piece of paper stops me," he said, his face so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think a judge's signature means anything to me?" She clawed at his wrist. Her back was pressed against the wet brick wall behind Alcott's restaurant, the place she'd just spent 11 hours on her feet serving people who never once looked her in the eye. Her phone was somewhere on the ground. She dropped it when he grabbed her. She could see its cracked screen glowing in a puddle 3 feet away. 3 feet might as well have been 3 miles. "Tobias is not yours," she managed. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Deacon laughed. It was the ugliest sound she'd ever heard. "He's not yours either, sweetheart. You're just the aunt. Courts love fathers. You were never his father." His grip tightened. And then light. Blinding white, cutting through the rain like a blade. Headlights. The sound of a car door. Footsteps on wet concrete, slow and unhurried, like whoever was walking had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Deacon didn't let go, not yet. He turned his head toward the light. A man stepped out of the dark. He wasn't tall in the way that intimidates. He was something else still, the way a held breath is still. He wore a charcoal overcoat, water beating off it like it didn't dare soak in. Behind him, a second man stood at the mouth of the alley with his hands clasped in front of him, waiting. The man in the overcoat looked at Deacon, the way you look at something you've already decided what to do with. "Let her go," he said, quiet, absolutely quiet. Deacon's grip loosened, just slightly, the way a dog loosens its jaw when it suddenly isn't sure it's the biggest animal in the room. "Who are you?" Deacon said. "I own this building." The man nodded toward the restaurant behind Nadia and everything connected to it. He paused. "Let her go." Deacon released her. Nadia didn't fall. She refused to fall. She pressed herself against the wall and filled her lungs with cold, rain-soaked air, and she watched the man in the overcoat watch Deacon the entire time. "Walk away," the man said. "Don't come back to this street." Deacon looked at Nadia, then at the man. Then he picked up his jacket from the ground. She hadn't even seen him drop it, and he walked, just like that, like something had simply been decided. The man turned to Nadia. "Are you hurt?" She wanted to say no. She was a woman who had been saying no for 14 months straight. "No, I'm fine. No, I don't need help. No, I can handle this." What came out instead was, "My nephew. I need to check on my nephew." The man held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "Soren." The second man was already moving, pulling out a phone. "We'll check on him," the man in the overcoat said. "Come inside first." "I don't know you," Nadia said. Her voice was steadier now. Anger does that sometimes, burns off the fear just enough to let you stand straight. "My name is Callum Adair." He said it like it was information she might already have. "I own Alcott's. You work for me." She blinked. She'd worked that restaurant for 8 months and never once laid eyes on the owner. "Come inside," he said again. She picked up her phone from the puddle. The screen was cracked through. She looked at it, at the dark alley, at the man waiting patiently in the rain. She walked inside. "Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I want to see where this story reaches." The kitchen smelled like garlic and burnt butter, and the kind of warmth that only exists in a working kitchen long after service has ended, that leftover heat that has nowhere to go. Nadia stood just inside the door and felt it hit her face and realized, for the first time in hours, that she was soaked through. She hadn't noticed. She'd been too busy surviving to notice she was freezing. One of the line cooks, a woman named Bet, was wiping down the prep counter when Nadia came through. She took one look at Nadia's neck, at the red marks just beginning to darken, and said, "Oh, honey," in the kind of voice that meant she'd seen this before and was furious she had to see it again. She didn't ask questions. She got ice wrapped in a dishcloth and pressed it gently under Nadia's jaw and said, "Hold that there," and went right back to what she was doing. Because sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is not make a production of helping you. Callum Adair stood at the far end of the kitchen on the phone. He spoke quietly. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He simply talked, and whoever was on the other end listened. Soren came back through the side door and caught Nadia's eye. "Your nephew is fine. Our man drove past the building. Lights on upstairs. Your neighbor, Mrs. Park, answered the buzzer. She's with him." Nadia exhaled. She hadn't realized she was holding it. "He knows not to open the door for anyone," she said, more to herself than to Soren. "He didn't," Soren said, and the smallest piece of her fear cracked off and fell away. Callum finished his call and crossed the kitchen. He pulled a stool from under the prep counter and sat down so that he was at eye level with her, not standing over her, not commanding the room, just level. She noticed that. "The man in the alley," he said. "He's done this before." It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "Deacon Prout. He was with my sister for 3 years. She died 14 months ago, car accident. I took custody of her son, Tobias. He's 8. She kept her voice flat. She'd told this story enough times that she'd learned to take the feeling out of it when she needed to. "Deacon has decided he wants Tobias. He has no legal claim. He has a restraining order against him. Neither of those things has stopped him." Callum was quiet for a moment. "How many times has he come at you?" "Physically, twice. The threats I stopped counting at 20. Something moved across Callum's face. Not surprise, not pity, something more like recognition. "You've been going to the police," he said. "6 times, 4 reports. 2 officers told me to try to resolve it civilly. One told me Deacon seemed like a reasonable man." She paused. "The restraining order came from the 6th visit after I showed up with photographs." Callum looked at her for a long moment. "You're raising a traumatized 8-year-old, working double shifts, and fighting a violent man with a court document that means nothing without enforcement." "I'm managing," she said. "You're surviving," he said. "There's a difference." She didn't have an answer for that because it was the truest sentence anyone had said to her in 14 months, and the precision of it caught her somewhere she wasn't prepared. "I'm going to make you an offer," Callum said. "You don't have to take it, but I want you to hear it before you decide." She waited. "I have a property. It's secure, private. I'm offering you and your nephew somewhere to stay while this situation is handled." "Handled," she repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means Deacon Prout will not be in a position to reach you." She stared at him. "Who are you, actually?" He held her gaze. "Someone who can do what the police have told you they can't." She thought about Tobias, about his drawings pinned to the wall by his bed, drawings of his mother mostly. She thought about the way he still sometimes woke up at 3 a.m. and sat in the dark without making a sound, because he'd already learned not to make a sound. She thought about the night 3 weeks ago when Deacon had shown up at his school, and she'd gotten a call from the front desk, and she'd run 6 blocks because she couldn't get a cab fast enough. "I need to be honest with you," she said. "I don't trust this." "Good," Callum said. "Don't trust anything you don't understand yet. Come see the property. If it doesn't feel right, you walk away and I never bother you again." She looked at Bet, who had stayed quiet the whole time, still holding the ice cloth. Bet gave her the smallest shrug, the kind that says, "I can't tell you what to do, but I'm not going to pretend this is a normal situation." Nadia looked back at Callum Adair. "I want to see Tobias first." "Of course," he said. Tobias was sitting at Mrs. Park's kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of cereal and a piece of paper in front of him. He was drawing. He did that, drew constantly, elaborate, detailed pictures of things he'd seen and things he imagined, filling in every corner of the page like he was afraid of empty space. When Nadia walked in, he looked up. He didn't run to her. He wasn't that kind of kid anymore. He just looked at her the way he looked at everything now, carefully, measuring, making sure she was real. She crossed the room and crouched down so she was at his eye level. "Hey, Bug," she said. "Hey," he said. She looked at the drawing. It was their apartment. Every detail, the crack in the ceiling above the stove, the way the curtains bunched on one side, the photograph of his mother on the shelf. "That's good," she said. He shrugged. "I got the window wrong. Nobody else would know that." He looked at her neck. His eyes went very still. "I'm fine," she said quietly. He nodded. He picked up his pencil and added a detail to the window. She breathed through the tightness in her chest and decided. The property was 40 minutes outside the city, a long driveway through pines, a house that sat at the edge of a bluff overlooking water. It wasn't a mansion in the way she'd feared. It was large, but it felt more like something built to last than something built to impress. Stone and glass, everything designed to be functional. Soren showed them around. Tobias walked through every room without speaking, which was normal. At the end of the hallway upstairs, there was a room with a long window that looked out over the water. Soren opened the door and Tobias stepped in and stood at the window. He stayed there for 2 full minutes. Then he turned around and said, "Can I put things on the wall?" Soren looked mildly surprised. "The whole wall if you want." Tobias looked at Nadia. She looked at him. "Okay," she said, "we'll try it. Now here is the question I want you to sit with. If you were Nadia, and a man you barely know offers you safety that the entire system failed to give you, do you take it? Or does trusting a stranger make you more vulnerable, not less? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next is where everything gets complicated." For 2 weeks it was almost quiet. Tobias filled an entire wall with drawings, not of the apartment anymore. New things, the trees outside, the water at different times of day, a figure that might have been Callum standing on the bluff with his hands in his pockets. He drew carefully, seriously, like each picture was a record that needed to be accurate. He had always drawn that way. Priya used to say he drew the world the way a scientist maps a coastline, missing nothing. Correcting himself when he got something wrong even if no one else would ever know. He still didn't talk much, but he ate. He slept through the night twice in a row, which hadn't happened since his mother died. Once, Nadia walked past his room at midnight and found him simply lying in bed staring at the ceiling, and when she pushed the door open he looked at her and said, "I'm not scared. I'm just thinking," and she had to go back to her room and sit on the edge of the bed for a minute before she could breathe correctly. Callum was there sometimes. Not intrusively, he'd appear in the kitchen in the morning with coffee already made, or she'd find him on the bluff at dusk standing exactly where Tobias had drawn him. He didn't talk much either, which she found she respected. One evening she was on the porch with a glass of water, going over scheduling files on her laptop. Callum had arranged remote work for her, managing the staffing rotations for 2 of his restaurants, when he came and sat in the other chair. They were quiet for a while. "You never asked me to explain myself further," she said eventually. "You explained enough," he said. "Most people ask more questions. They want to understand how a person ends up in a situation like mine. Like there must have been a decision point where I went wrong." "You didn't go wrong," he said. "Your sister died, you chose her son. That's not a mistake, that's a decision." She turned to look at him. "You talk like someone who's had to defend their decisions before." He was quiet for a moment. "My father died when I was 11. Heart attack. My mother worked 3 jobs. I learned early that there are situations where the system doesn't show up and you either find another way or you don't." She held that. "Is that what you are, another way?" He looked at the water. "I try to be." It wasn't a full answer, she knew that, but she let it sit. Then the phone rang. Soren appeared at the porch door. His face was flat in the way that meant the news was not good. "Deacon made bail," he said. Nadia set down her water glass very carefully. "When?" This morning, someone posted it late last night. He paused. We're working on who? Callum was already standing. The stillness was gone, not replaced by panic, but by something more directed. He looked at Soren. Vera. She's on it. Nadia looked between them. What aren't you telling me? Callum turned to her. He didn't hesitate. She'd noticed he never hesitated when she asked a direct question. The bail was posted by a man named Gideon Farrow. He has no connection to Deacon Prout. He has a very specific connection to me. The air on the porch changed. He's using Deacon, she said. She understood it before he finished. He's using Deacon to get to you, and Deacon is using Tobias to get to me. Yes. She stood up. So my nephew is being used as a pressure point in something that has nothing to do with him. Yes. She walked to the railing and looked out at the water and felt the kind of anger that is so complete it becomes almost calm. The kind that doesn't shake, that doesn't cry, that simply decides. Fix it, she said. We're working on it, Callum said. No, she turned around. I mean fix it, whatever you have to do. I'm not asking you to explain it to me. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand what kind of man you are or what kind of resources you have access to. I have one thing I care about in this world, and he is upstairs right now drawing a picture of the ocean. She looked Callum in the eye. Fix it. Something shifted in him, not surprise exactly, more like recognition. We're moving you, he said. Tonight, there's a house in Savannah, different security configuration, harder to reach. And Deacon. Gideon Farrow overplayed his hand. He thought Deacon was a problem for me. He didn't realize Deacon is now a problem for himself. Callum paused. When Farrow cuts him loose, and he will, once he realizes this isn't working, Deacon will have no money, no protection, and an outstanding warrant. We'll be ready. She searched his face for doubt. She didn't find any. Okay, she said. I'll pack Tobias's drawings. Savannah was warm in a way Portland never was, the kind of warm that lives in the air even at night, thick with salt and something almost like honey. The safe house sat at the edge of the marsh, surrounded by old oak trees draped in moss that moved slow and heavy in the breeze. Tobias stepped out of the car and looked up at the trees for a long time. They're like curtains, he said. Spanish moss, Nadia told him. He looked at her. Can I draw them? As many times as you want. He got his sketchbook out of his backpack before they'd even brought the luggage inside. The days in Savannah had a different texture, slower. The threat was still there. Nadia felt it the way you feel weather before it arrives, but it existed at a distance, something being handled in rooms she wasn't in, by people she decided to trust because the alternative was worse. Vera Whitfield arrived on a Tuesday. She was Callum's lawyer, tall, direct, the kind of woman who wore her competence plainly and didn't bother making it comfortable for anyone. She came in with a leather briefcase and a handshake that meant business, and she sat across from Nadia at the kitchen table and said, "We need to talk about Tobias." "We're listening," Nadia said. Tobias was in the next room within earshot, his pencil moving steadily across the page. She'd learned not to try to separate him from hard conversations. He knew more than she thought. He always had. Deacon Prout has no biological or legal relationship to Tobias, Vera said. The restraining order is solid. His recent arrest for assault and the documented violation of the protective order give you grounds that most family courts would find extremely persuasive. But what will make all of this airtight permanently is finalizing your legal guardianship. I started the process 8 months ago, Nadia said. The court date keeps getting delayed. Not anymore. Vera opened her briefcase. I've filed a motion to expedite. Given the documented history of harassment, the assault record, and Deacon's current circumstances, no bail poster, outstanding warrant, the judge has agreed to hear it within the week. Nadia stared at the documents, at the language that would finally, officially, say what had been true for 14 months. That Tobias was hers. She heard the pencil stop in the next room. Tobias appeared in the doorway. He looked at the papers on the table, then at Nadia, then at Vera. "Is that about me?" he asked. Vera looked at Nadia. Nadia nodded once. "Yes," Vera said. "It says you belong with your aunt, officially, in a way that's very hard for anyone to argue with." Tobias looked at the papers for a long moment. Something moved across his face, something very old for an 8-year-old, some weight that had been sitting on him for over a year that he hadn't had the words for. He went back to his drawing. The call came from Sarin 2 days later, short, efficient. Pharaoh pulled the plug. Deacon is on his own. He used the last of his own money to retain a lawyer who took one look at the case and reportedly told him he had no claim and no future here. The lawyer withdrew this morning. Nadia was standing in the kitchen when she heard this. She set her coffee cup down and pressed both hands flat on the counter. "And Deacon himself?" she asked. "He's at a motel in Vancouver, Washington, alone. Warrant is active, it's a matter of time." She stood there for a moment. She didn't feel triumphant. That surprised her. She felt something more like exhaustion finally being allowed to exist, the particular tiredness of a person who has been tense for so long they forgot what loose felt like. She walked to the back porch and sat on the steps and let the Savannah evening settle around her, the smell of the marsh, the sound of something moving through the tall grass, the orange light going amber, going gray. Callum came and sat on the step below her, not beside her, below like he was deliberately not crowding her. They were quiet for a long time. "My sister's name was Priya," Nadia said eventually. "She was the kind of person who made every room warmer just by walking into it. She brought people food they didn't ask for. She remembered the names of people's dogs." She paused. "She had terrible taste in men. She knew it. She used to laugh about it before Deacon. After Deacon, she didn't laugh about it anymore." Callum didn't say anything. He just listened. "When she died, I didn't have time to grieve. There was Tobias, and there was paperwork, and there was Deacon immediately showing up and making claims, and I just had to keep moving." She looked at the darkening sky. "I don't think I've actually cried yet. 14 months and I haven't cried for her. I've thought about her every single day. I've talked about her to Tobias every chance I get so he doesn't forget her voice. But the crying, the real kind, the kind that means you've stopped running long enough to feel it, I haven't gotten there. I keep waiting for the moment it comes and it doesn't." "You will," Callum said quietly, "when you believe it's safe to." She looked at him. "That's what grief does," he said. "It waits, it's patient, it knows you'll come back to it." She studied his face. "Your father." "I cried for him when I was 27, he said, "in a parking garage in Seattle of all places, 16 years after he died. Something reminded me of him and that was it. 4 minutes in a parking garage." He paused. "It helped." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but it was there. "Thank you," she said, "for the alley, for all of this." He looked at the marsh. "You said thank you like it's over. Isn't it? The legal piece is almost over. The rest takes as long as it takes." He glanced back at her. "Tobias's silence, your sister's absence, that's not a case that gets closed." "No," she said, "it's not." The guardianship hearing lasted 40 minutes. Nadia wore a blue blazer she'd pressed the night before and sat very straight in the chair next to Vera and answered every question directly. Her voice did not waver. She had prepared herself the way she prepared for everything, methodically, thoroughly, allowing herself exactly 20 minutes the night before to be afraid, and then putting the fear in a box and closing the lid. Deacon's name came up once. The judge looked at the file, then she looked at Nadia, then she signed. That was it. Nadia walked out of the courthouse into the Savannah morning, sunlight through Spanish moss, the smell of the river 2 blocks away, and she stood on the sidewalk and breathed. Vera was beside her. "Done," she said. Nadia nodded. You should go be with Tobias. Yes, Nadia said. Yes, I should. She found him in the room with the big window, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his sketchbook in his lap. The late afternoon light came through the glass in long, golden bars, and one of them fell across the page he was drawing on. She sat down beside him on the floor. He didn't look up. He never looked up right away when she entered. He always gave himself a moment, like he needed to confirm she was staying before he responded. She'd learned not to rush that moment. It mattered to him. So it mattered to her. She looked at what he was drawing. 3 figures standing in front of a house. One small, two tall. The house had a porch, and beyond the porch, water. She could tell it was the marsh by the way he'd drawn the tall grasses, precise and detailed. One of the tall figures had a hand that seemed to be almost touching the small figure's shoulder. Not quite. Almost. She looked at the figures for a long time. Then Tobias set down his pencil. He looked at the drawing. He looked at Nadia. He said, "We're okay." 2 words, quietly, with the certainty of someone who had decided something. She didn't move. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just sat there on the floor in the afternoon light with her nephew, and the marsh outside the window and his drawing in his lap, and she felt 14 months of held breath begin slowly, quietly, to release. "Yeah, Bugs," she finally said, "we're okay." She put her arm around him and he leaned into her, not dramatically, just slightly, the way a person leans into something solid, and they sat like that until the light changed. Here is what the story of Nadia Osai and her nephew Tobias actually is, when you look at it straight. It is not a story about being rescued. Callum Adair opened a door, but Nadia walked through it herself, every single time. She chose to take Tobias when the whole world expected her to hand him to the system. She chose to fight Deacon with paperwork and police reports and 6 visits that went nowhere. She chose to trust a stranger when trust had been used against her. She chose to stay in that courtroom chair until a judge put a stamp on paper that said what was already true. Tobias didn't speak for months, not because he had nothing to say. He spoke when he believed the ground was solid enough to stand on. That's not a small thing, that's everything. There is a version of this story where Nadia breaks, where the weight of 14 months alone, the double shifts, the police reports that went nowhere, the night Deacon showed up at the school, the feeling of being one wrong decision away from losing everything, where all of that finally becomes too much. That version exists. It would have been easy. No one would have blamed her. She didn't choose that version, not once. What they built in that house by the Savannah Marsh, whatever it was, undefined and fragile and cautious, it was built by 2 people who had both learned the hard way that safety is not a thing that happens to you. It's a thing you build, piece by piece, out of whatever is available. And sometimes what's available is a stranger who walks into an alley at the right moment. And sometimes it's a drawing of 3 figures in front of a house. And sometimes it's 2 words from an 8-year-old who spent 14 months deciding whether the world was safe enough to say them in. We're okay. If this story moved you, hit subscribe so you never miss one. Like this video, it helps more people find stories like this one. And leave a comment. Tell me what moment in Nadia's story hit you the hardest. I read every single one.